when he was introducing me to this angle with Goldust, and it was going to be Razor versus Goldust, and I remember Kev was in the office with me, and he goes, "I got this idea for you. It's going to be this guy. He's going to be in love with Razor."
Exposed. Scott Hall did not leave the WWF because he wanted to. He left because the company made it possible to stay. And right at the very end, when he tried to walk away with his head held high, they hit him where it hurt the most. February 1996, Hall sent Vince McMahon a telegram. It was his official 90-day notice. His contract was ending in May. He was telling the company early, the way the rules said he had to. That was it. Followed the process. He did what was required of him. Professional to the last. If you want to see more stories like this, use the hype button and give this video some hype right now. On the exact same day that McMahon received that telegram, Scott Hall was handed a 6-week suspension. The reason given was a failed drug test. The substance was marijuana. 6 weeks out, gone. And with him went his spot at WrestleMania 12. The biggest show, the biggest payday, wiped out in a single memo on a single morning. That timing was not a coincidence. That timing was a message. And this video is going to explain exactly what that message meant, who sent it, and why they felt they needed to send it at all. Because the real story of Scott Hall in the WWF is not just about a man who decided to jump ship for more money. It's about a man who was quietly placed in a box long before ever bought his ticket to Atlanta. WWF did not lose Scott in 1996. They had quietly turned against him years before that, just never told. What this video will show you is that there was a corporate ceiling placed on Hall. It was built deliberately and maintained carefully. It came from institutional bias inside the bookies. It came from corporate anxiety about what Hall represented as a man and as a potential liability. It came from a cold and cynical calculation that kept him profitable and useful without ever allowing him to reach the level his talent deserved. This is the story of how a performer with every tool required for greatness was systematically held back by the very organization that turned him into a household. It starts long before he ever stepped foot inside a WWF. Before Scott Hall ever became Razor Ramon, he was a man the wrestling industry simply could not figure out. He entered the business in 1984, and from the very beginning, promoters could see the tool, the size, the athleticism, the natural presence that made audiences pay attention when he walked into a room. Just could not work out where to put him or who to tell him to be. He started in championships from Florida, working under his real name. He was fast-tracked into a high-profile feud with Dusty Rhodes, which was significant exposure for someone so new to the business. But there was no defined character builder. He had the body and the presence. He just did not yet have the identity that would make it all come together into something lasting. He built early regional notoriety and then stalled. The momentum dried up, moved on. In 1985, he went to the National Wrestling Alliance. He was given a tag team identity, teaming with Dan Spivey as a duo called American Starship. Hall was billed as Starship Coyote. It was not a terrible concept on paper, but in execution, it went nowhere. They were used to put over Ole and Arn, and that was essentially the seed. No commercial success, no momentum of any kind. Used and moved on again. Came the American Wrestling Association, where he spent the better part of 4 years. If you want a perfect example of how poorly the industry understood Scott Hall during this period of his career, look at what AWA promoter Vern Gagne did with him. Gagne wanted Hall to become the next Hulk Hogan, not in terms of developing a similarly charismatic personality. He wanted Hall to grow a handlebar mustache and physically mirror Hogan's in-ring. He wanted a clone, copy, someone wearing Hogan's skin. Hall won the AWA World Tag Team title alongside Kurt Hennig, and that was the hype. His singles push stalled. He lost to Stan Hansen. He lost to Rick Martel. Gagne could see the frame. He just kept trying to hang someone else's picture inside it. In 1989, Hall went to World Championship Wrestling for the first time. He was brought in by Jim Ross, who was assembling a group of younger talent that also included Brian Pillman and Sid Vicious. It should have been the right kind of environment for Hall to finally find. Instead, he made no meaningful impact at all. He was relegated to regular jobbing, lost his matches quietly, and eventually went on hiatus in the company without any lasting impression. He moved to Puerto Rico to work for the World Wrestling Council, and things genuinely went well. He defeated Miguel Perez Jr. for the WWC Caribbean Heavyweight Champ and performed well throughout. Real success. Genuine genuine title. But Puerto Rico was not where the major money flowed. Plus, it was not where the television camera. He came back to WCW for a second stint, this time operating as the Diamond Stud, a flamboyant heel managed by Diamond Dallas Page. He received an initial push, defeated Tom Zenk, and for a brief moment it seemed like something might finally take root. Then the losses to Ron Simmons started, the singles push evaporated, he was shuffled into mid-card tag team work, and the momentum died again. Same story as every previous stop. A new character, a brief window of opportunity, and then the ceiling coming down. Every single stop on that journey told the same story. Promoter after promoter could see what Scott Hall had physically and athletic. None of them could see what he was as a complete and total performer. They kept pushing him into shapes that did not suit him and never would. Hogan Clone, a tag team worker, a mid-card villain without a specific identity. Nobody had the creative vision to simply step back and let Hall be himself. The industry kept misreading. Every single time it did, Hall picked himself back up, moved on, and found somewhere else to try because he knew what he had. He just kept waiting for someone else to see. The scale of that wasted potential becomes clearer when you put it in context. Hall spent nearly a decade in the industry before the WWF. 8 years of working people consistently failed to see what was front. A lesser performer would have given up, accepted a secondary role, stopped pushing for something better. Hall never did. He kept going. He kept developing. He kept wrestling. He kept putting in the work. He kept showing up. People who were showing up for him in return. The connection between Hall and a live audience was something his employers at the time could not fully account for in their booking log, and they never really tried to. He kept building on what he had, even when the system around him refused to reward it. Persistence says something important about the man. He believed in himself. History kept telling him his belief was misplaced, and he turned out to be right. Then in May 1992, Scott Hall entered the WWF, and everything changed. Hall walked into an initial pitch meeting with Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson. What happened in that room turned out to be one of the most quietly significant moments in wrestling history. Hall had a character fully worked out in his mind already. He was going to base it on the 1983 film Scarface, specific on the characters of Tony Montana and Manny Ribera. He delivered movie dialogue in a thick Cuban accent. He described vignettes and aesthetic details, talked about driving a convertible with leopard skin upholstery, created the full visual world of the character he had in mind. Sman and Patterson sat across the table from him and had absolutely no idea what film. They did not recognize dialogue. They were completely unfamiliar with Scarface, so they praised Hall for his outstanding original creativity and lauded him as a genuine genius. They believed every word of it was something he had invented from nothing. Patterson and McMahon came up with the name Razor as the character's calling card. They agreed it should function as a nickname. Hall then went to Tito Santana, a respected veteran with genuine understanding of Latino culture presentation, and asked him for a surname that would sound authentic. Santana suggested Ramon, and so Razor Ramon was born. Character created almost entirely by Scott Hall himself, with the WWF office congratulating himself for having nurtured such remarkable talent. Tom Fleming designed the costume. On August 8, 1992, on an episode of Superstar, Razor Ramon made his in-ring debut, squashing a local jobber named Paul Van Dale. The audience knew within seconds that something completely different had arrived. The heavy gold chain, casual contempt, the toothpick flick, the slow, deliberate warning to the ringside staff about the physical consequences of touching jewelry. It was effortless and completely distinct. It resonated immediately because Hall had understood something far deeper than the surface aesthetics of Scarf. He had understood the energy, the specific kind of cool that only works because it genuinely does not care whether you find it impressive or not. The character was a piece of himself made large, and the audience felt that authenticity immediately. The WWF wasted no time inserting Razor Ramon into the main event pick. On September 14, 1992, on Primetime Wrestling, Ramon interfered in a WWF Championship match and attacked Randy Savage, providing Ric Flair with the opportunity to capture the title. Interference served a carefully calculated backstage purpose. Savage was going through a brutal, well-publicized real-life divorce from Elizabeth Hullett. His behavior backstage had become erratic and unpredictable. McMahon had decided to get the title off him quickly, but he did not want to damage Savage's credibility in the process of doing so. Ramon's attack provided the perfect message. It protected Savage's standing while launching Ramon into a major program as a consequence. Hello. The angle was designed to culminate at Survivor Series 1992 in a massive tag team match, pitting Ramon and Flair against Savage and the Ultimate Warrior. The Warrior was fired from the company before the event could take place. Flair's advisor, Mr. Perf, stepped out of retirement to take Warrior's spot. The match happened with Ramon and Flair losing by disqualification. Big moment that was supposed to cement Razor Ramon's position. Nesh in the main event picture ended not with a state but with a non-finish and a reshuffle of plans. The opportunity dissolved. That became the defining pattern with Scott Hall in the WWF. He was always close to the main event. He was never genuinely inside. He was the mechanism the office used to make bigger stories fun correct. He moved narrative pieces around the board. He created situations, served structural purposes, made other performers look more significant. But the reward, the title, the coronation never came. There was always something. A disqualification, a transitional defense, a program designed entirely around elevating someone else. His own moment was perpetually deferred. The most precise illustration of this structural pattern is through the Royal Rumble paradox. From 1993 through to 1996, Scott Hall never competed in the 30-man Royal Rumble match. Not once. 4 consecutive years. The Rumble was the annual rocket launch for championship contenders. Whoever won it earned their WrestleMania main event. It was the single most important match on the calendar for any performer with genuine championship aspirations. Hall was never in it. Instead, every single year without exception, Hall was placed in a separate match running alongside the Rumble championship match of some description. 2. Meaningful on the surface, but structured specific to keep him anchored in the same position rather than moving up. 1993, he challenged Bret Hart for the WWF Heavyweight Champion and lost by submission. Credible enough challenge for the world title. Not credible enough, apparent, to win it. He was there to make Hart look strong against a dangerous opponent and then return to lane. In 1994, he was the Intercontinental Champ defending against Erwin R. Shyster. His turn to babyface had been entirely organic and genuinely powerful. The crowd loved Razor Ramon in a way that felt completely real and was hard to manufacture artificially. Connection, that deep audience love, was channeled entirely into stabilizing the mid-card. Was delighted to have Hall keeping that division running well. In 1995, still the Intercontinental Champion, he lost the title to Jeff Jarrett. He was used as the mechanism to establish Jarrett as a significant, give the rising character credible scalp, build his momentum, and move on. Hall's function was transitional gatekeeping, effect clear, entirely without upward trajectory for himself. In 1996, he lost the Intercontinental title to Goldust after interference from the 1-2-3 Kid. Again, transition. Again, designed to launch a mid-card program for WrestleMania. Again, Hall providing the service and receiving nothing in return beyond the payment. His contract guaranteed 4 years, 4 Royal Rumble events, 4 times booked into a separate match, kept him productive and useful and exactly where the office needed him to be. Never once given the match that might have changed every contrast that makes all of this possible to simply wave away is Kevin Nash. Nash was Hall's closest friend. They had come up together, they traveled together. They were considered inseparable by everyone around them. But in late 1994, McMahon did something with Nash that he had never been remotely willing to do with Hall. Nash had been working as Shawn Michaels' bodyguard under the name Diesel. He was physically enormous and had the kind of imposing visual presence that McMahon had always been drawn to as a creative choice. But he had not proven himself as a singles competitor in any sustained or meaningful way. There was no long track record of carrying match, no established body of work showing he could deliver consistently under main event pressure. No particular reason beyond his physical dimension to believe he was ready for the highest level. None of that mattered to McMahon. At a Madison Square Garden House show in November 1994, Nash squashed Bob Backlund for the WWF champion. The match lasted 8 seconds. Backlund had been champion. Nash ran in, applied his finishing hold, and walked out of the building with the belt. Hall had spent years building one of the most credible, consistently entertaining, and genuinely over characters on the entire roster. He had been carrying mid-card program with genuine craft and delivering matches that people actively wanted to watch. Beat a man in 8 seconds and became world champion. The Nash title reign was a disappointment in business terms. Buy rates dropped. His matches against limited workers like Mabel and Sid were critically panned. Dominant giant reign that McMahon had envisioned as a commercial success failed to deliver the numbers he had expected. The year-long run was judged harshly wide. Hall, during this identical period, was delivering some of the finest work entire career. Merchandise sales were strong. His connection with the live audience was organic and deep and genuine. His ability to carry high-quality matches with virtually any opponent was one of his most dependable qualities. The argument that Hall could have done what Nash did in that title transition and done it significantly better for them is not hindsight or revision. It's simply reading what was actually happening on the television product every single. But McMahon chose Nash because Nash was taller and broader, because Nash had the specific physical temp that McMahon's historical preferences had always gravitated to. Size over skill, the corporate look over sustained form. That was the filter, and Hall did not pass, regardless of what he delivered. Wrote. It is worth sitting with this for a moment. Hall had been the better performer by virtually every measurable stand for years before Nash received the title. He had better matches. He had stronger merchandise numbers. He had a more organic connections. He had a more established track record of delivering consistently at a high level. By the logic the WWF publicly claimed to operate on, he should have been the clear choice. But the WWF's public logic and its actual logic were not the same thing. McMahon had a template in his mind for what a champion should look like, and size was at the top of that template in a way that no amount of in-ring excellence could displace. Hall fit the template in almost every other way. He just was not tall enough. He just not wide enough. And that was the end of the conversation. Hall was kept busy mid-card feud against Jeff Jarrett, Dean Douglas, and Xavier Vega. Legitimate work, real program. But these were not stepping stones toward any. They were the destination itself. The ceiling was invisible, but completely permanently solid. The reason Hall was kept in that position involved something more complex than just McMahon's preference for large performers. It was also about what Hall represented as a man and the very specific requirements that came with being the company's public-facing world champion. The WWF, the world champion, not simply the best performer on the roster. The world champion was a brand ambassador, fullest possible sense. They represented the company in mainstream media interviews. They appeared on radio programs, attended charity events, participated in a promotional schedule that required someone the organization could trust, complete in any environment, to behave professionally, reliably, and in a way that reflected well brand. Trust was not something given lightly. It had to be earned, and it had to be absolute. The decision about who received that trust rested with a specific group: McMahon, Pat Patterson, Bruce Pritchard, and Jim Ross. And when it came to Scott Hall, that trust did not. Behind the scenes, Hall was fighting a very real and highly visible battle with substance abuse, alcoholism, and prescription pill dependence. He was described by those around as a brilliant functioning alcoholic, which is another way of saying he could show up, do his job at a high level. But his lifestyle away from the ring was a source of constant and ongoing anxiety for the people managing. Could see what was happening. They lived with the consequence week in and week out, and they made their calculations accordingly. Within the clique, the close-knit backstage alliance also comprised Nash, Michaels, Triple H, and Shawn Walton. There was an unspoken but very real hierarchy of reliability. Triple H did not drink and did not use drugs. He was the pragmatic, grounded, practically minded member. He kept his head when those around him were losing theirs, serving as a stabilizing presence. Nash maintained executive favor through sharp political intelligence and his consistent ability to manage his relationship with the off without creating direct conflict. Michaels had serious personal issues his own that were well known backstage, but his in-ring genius was considered so exceptional and so completely impossible to replace that manager made the decision to carry him through his He was the genius who got the exception made. Deeper you look at the clique hierarchy, the more the internal politics of the period come into focus. This was a group of 5 men who were close enough to function almost as a unit inside the company. They protected each other. They supported each other. They used their collective influence to shape creative direction program. But even within that, the company had made its assessments about who was trustworthy and who was not. Hall was inside the group person, but outside the circle, trust, profession. He had the friendship without the institutional backing that came with it. Gap between where he stood within the clique and where he stood within the company's plans was its own kind of quiet cruelty. Hall received no such accept. He was viewed as too volatile, too unpredictable, someone the office could confidently place in front of a mainstream journalist or at a public-facing charity event representing their family friend brand. Fear, whether it was entirely fair in every respect or not, functioned as a ceiling. Nothing Hall did in the ring, no matter how brilliant brilliant or how consistent could raise it, because the ceiling was not about what happened between the ropes. One final layer of cynical logic made the situation even worse. Hall's own professional attitude contributed directly to his stagnation. He understood the wrestling business at a deep level, and that understanding meant he recognized that his role sometimes required putting other people over. He never fought, he never protected his record politically, he never went to the office and created conflict over his finish. His most famous example is the 1-2-3 Kid. In May 1993, on Monday Night Raw, Sean Waltman was a complete unknown. Small, unproven, no name recognition at all. The match was supposed to be a routine squash, but Waltman hit Hall with a roll-up and got the 3 count. Hall sold it entirely, treated it as a genuine shock, and made Waltman into an overnight sensation. It was one of the most memorable upsets in the show's early history and created a genuine new star. Hall had done it completely willing. The Office saw that and remembered as proof of Hall's generosity or his deep understand what business. They saw confirmation that he was an ideal mid-card asset. He would cooperate. He would take losses when asked, valued his income over his political position, so they left him right there. The cynical logic was transparent. Why take the risk of putting the world championship on someone whose personal life represented a genuine corporate liability, when his selflessness and his cool fact were already doing exactly what was needed in the mid-card at a fraction of the risk? Hall had made himself too cooperative to promote. His reliability in his role became the permanent justification for keeping him in it. By late 1995 and into early 1996, all of these frustrations had been quietly accumulated year, and then the creative situation Hall found himself in pushed everything beyond a breakpoint. He was placed into a feud with Gold. The Goldust character, played by Dustin Rhodes, had been designed by McMahon to generate intense heel heat through a very specific and deliberately uncomfortable mechanism. It exploited the homophobia of a 1990s audience, using suggestive physical contact, groping, and extended psychological mind games to disturb and unsettle his babyface opponent. Dustin Rhodes was deeply committed to the role and actively wanted to push its boundary as far as management would permit. During backstage planning sessions, he reportedly suggested that he should receive physical breast implants to enhance the character's bizarre and disquieting presentation. Hall was deeply uncomfortable the entire program. He had young children at home watching television. Homoerotic overtones of the angle worried him on a personal level. He